The check was for $100 million. I held it for exactly 3 seconds before I handed it away. Standing next to me were my twins, Nadia and James, 11 years old, in their school uniforms because I hadn't even told them what we were doing that day. The journalist asked if I wanted to say something. I looked at the camera and said, "This was never mine to keep." My parents were watching from a live stream in a hotel room 40 miles away. They had called me 17 times that morning. I didn't pick up once. If you're here for the first time, follow this story to the end. I promise you it earns every minute. And drop your city in the comments below. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. There's something about knowing a stranger in another country heard this that makes the whole thing feel worth telling. My name is Elena. I'm 34 years old. When I was 26, my husband Marcus died in a car accident on a Tuesday afternoon, leaving me with 7-month-old twins, $42 in a checking account, and parents who opened their front door and said, and I am quoting exactly, "Well, I suppose you'd better come in." I remember the day everything broke. It was a Thursday in March, about 3 years after I'd moved back. Marcus's parents were visiting. His mother Ruth and his father Dean, who'd driven 4 hours to see the twins on their birthday. My mother had spent the morning being warm and accommodating in that particular way she had. The way that always made me feel like a guest in her own house while also making me feel like a burden in it. She'd made cake. She'd put on music. She was performing a version of herself she reserved for people whose opinion she wanted. Nadia and James were in the living room opening gifts. Ruth had brought a small wooden toy chest she'd painted herself, and Dean had brought a savings bond for each of them, $300 apiece. Small, practical, loving. My father said, "That's very thoughtful," in a voice that meant something else entirely. After dinner, Marcus's parents stepped outside to the porch. I was at the sink. My mother was at the kitchen table. She didn't know I hadn't left the room yet. "The children are well cared for," Ruth said from outside. "They are," Dean said. "Elena's doing fine." And then I heard my mother say quietly to my father, who was pouring a drink in the corner, "Fine. Because of us. Did you notice the gift? A savings bond. $300. Like that makes a dent." She laughed softly. Not cruelly exactly. Just privately. Like a woman who had accepted a deal she resented and was checking in with herself about the terms. "At this rate we're raising these children until we're 80. I stood very still at the sink. The water was running. That night after the twins were in bed and Marcus's parents had gone, I sat in the small room that used to be my childhood bedroom and had become my bedroom again, with a pack-and-play in the corner and a crib where my old desk used to be, and I looked at the wall for a very long time. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. But let me tell you how it got this bad first. Because it didn't start the way you might think. Marcus and I had met in graduate school. He was studying environmental law. I was in finance, specifically fund management. We married at 24, bought a small house with his parents' help, and had the twins at 25. 7 months later, Marcus was gone. A pickup truck ran a red light at 4 in the afternoon and that was it. No warning. No version of the future I had planned. The loss was so immediate and so total that I couldn't think in full sentences for 3 months. I sold the house. It felt wrong to stay financially and emotionally, and the mortgage was more than I could handle alone. After fees and paying off the remaining balance, I netted about $12,000. I thought it would last longer than it did. My parents lived 40 minutes away in the house where I'd grown up. They had room. My brother had moved out years earlier. My father was retired. My mother had part-time work she'd always referred to as her project. They offered and I was grateful and I told myself it was temporary. For the first year it mostly was. They were kind. My mother watched the twins so I could work part-time, freelance consulting for a small investment firm. I paid what I could toward groceries, about $400 a month. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. I stayed out of the way. But somewhere around month 14 something shifted. My mother started keeping a running account of what things cost, not accusatory, just mentioned. The water bill was high this month. The twins go through shoes. I had to call the HVAC repairman again. Each comment was individually reasonable. Together they formed a kind of ledger, and I was always in debt to it. By year 2, I was contributing $800 a month and still working part-time, because the childcare costs of working full-time would have nearly canceled any full-time salary I could have found with 2 toddlers at home. I was trapped in the math of it. I paid what I could and told myself it was temporary. Marcus had had a small life insurance policy, $250,000. My parents knew about it. What they didn't know was that I had never touched it. I'd put it in a low-fee index fund the week after his funeral, and then mentally locked the door. It wasn't money I could spend. It felt like it belonged to the kids when they were older. I listed it on no documents, mentioned it to no one, and paid for everything I could from my own earnings like it didn't exist. By year 3, the contributions had become expected. Not requested. Expected. When I missed a month because a freelance contract fell through, my mother mentioned it. Not angrily. Conversationally. "We're a little short this month, you know how it is." I paid it the following week. That night at the sink, the night of the twins' birthday, the night I heard my mother's quiet laugh. I went back to my room and opened my laptop for the first time in a long time, and looked at the investment account where Marcus's life insurance had been quietly sitting for 3 years. It had grown to just over $400,000. I sat with that number for a very long time. What I haven't told you yet is that the week after the twins' birthday, I made an appointment with a financial advisor named Carol, someone I'd worked with briefly in a professional capacity before Marcus died. I drove to her office on a Wednesday afternoon while the twins were at school, and I told her everything. The account. The amount. My situation. Carol didn't blink. She pulled up my account, reviewed the holdings and said, "Elena, this money has been very well managed. What do you want to do with it?" I said I didn't know yet, but I had some ideas. What Carol helped me understand over 4 separate meetings across 3 months was that the money properly handled was not just a lifeline. It was a foundation. The fund Marcus and I had invested in had done extremely well, and there was an opportunity to roll a significant portion into a real estate trust that her firm managed. The projections, conservatively, showed that by the time Nadia and James were 18, the account could be worth substantially more than it already was. There was also a nonprofit fund structure Carol walked me through that had significant tax advantages, one that could, at the right moment, make a very large, very public charitable gift and leave the twins with enough to fully fund their education and early adulthood. I want to be careful here about the numbers. What I can tell you is that over the 8 years between Marcus's death and the morning I handed over that check, the account grew from $250,000 to something close to $115 million. I know that sounds impossible. It partially was luck. The fund performed at an exceptional rate during that period. But Carol was also brilliant, and I had never touched a penny of it, which turned out to matter enormously. The plan when it crystallized was simple: build for 8 years. Then give the majority of it away in Marcus's name. Keep enough to buy a home, pay for the twins' education, and live without fear. My parents knew none of this. I left on a Saturday in September, when the twins were at a friend's house. I had arranged this intentionally. I had packed over 2 weeks, a box here, a bag there. Things moved to my car trunk and then to a storage unit a few miles away so that on the actual morning I was not frantic. There was almost nothing left to take. I had already signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment across town. I had already enrolled Nadia and James in a new school. I had arranged for their belongings to be moved by a service while my parents were at their Saturday morning routine. I left a letter on the kitchen counter. I had written it 6 times before I was satisfied. Part of it read, "I am grateful for the shelter you provided during the hardest years of my life." That is true and I mean it. I have not been able to tell you that I have felt, for a long time, more like a burden in your accounting than a daughter in your home. The children and I are safe and cared for. Please do not come to the address below. There is no address below. I will be in touch when I'm ready. I hope that soon. I left the house key on top of the letter. I took the twins' drawings from the refrigerator. I took the photograph of Marcus from the hallway table, the one my mother had once moved to the guest room and I had moved back twice. I took the small wooden toy chest Ruth had painted. I turned off the kitchen light. I did not look back. The first call came at 2:47 that afternoon. My mother's voice on the voicemail was confused, searching. "Elena, I don't understand. What does the letter mean? Where are the children?" She sounded genuinely lost, and I felt the old pull of guilt, the one that had kept me in that house 3 years longer than I should have stayed. I sat with the guilt. I did not call back. By evening the calls had shifted. My father. This is extremely unfair, Elena. After everything we've done. After everything your mother has sacrificed. That phrase, after everything we've done, struck me as interesting. I had been keeping my own accounting. By day 3, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. A borrowed phone, it turned out, because she suspected I'd blocked her. The twins need stability, she said, her voice pulled tight. You're being selfish. This is about you, not them. You always make it about you. She paused, and then because she thought she was leaving a voicemail and not speaking to me directly. You were never going to be able to do this alone. I don't know why you're pretending otherwise. I texted back simply. We're well. I'll be in touch. 3 weeks after I left, they drove to Nadia and James's old school to pick them up. The school called me. The children had already been transferred. My mother told the administrator, standing in the parking lot, that I was unstable. I learned this through the administrator, who was kind and professional about it. I sent my parents a letter, certified mail, with the name and contact information of my attorney. It said, all future communication should go through my lawyer. This is not a punishment. It's a boundary. I hope you can respect it. They did not for several more weeks. And then, eventually, they did. A year later, I am sitting in a kitchen I chose, in a neighborhood where a woman named Patricia walks her dog past my window every morning at 7:15, and I have started to expect her and feel warmly toward this. The twins go to a school they like. James has joined a chess club. Nadia draws constantly on everything on the backs of grocery lists and in the margins of her homework. And her teacher sent home a note last month that said her visual thinking was extraordinary. I put it on the refrigerator and left it there. I work full-time now back in finance, managing a small portfolio for a firm that lets me work 3 days remote. I joined a hiking group on a Thursday evening last spring, partly because it was something to do and partly because I knew that if I stayed inside I'd lose the habit of going outside. And the habit of going outside matters more than people say. My health has improved in ways that are hard to attribute to anything specific. I sleep. I cook dinner without the quiet performance of gratitude. I pick up the phone when it rings and I don't dread it. About 8 months after I left, I called my mother. Not my father, my mother. We spoke for 40 minutes. I did not apologize and neither did she, exactly. But there was a conversation happening underneath the conversation that felt like the beginning of something. We have spoken 4 times since. The calls are short. She asks about the children. I tell her a few things. I don't tell her everything. This seems right for now. She has not seen the news coverage of the donation. Or if she has not mentioned it. I am not ready to know which. Last month was Marcus's birthday. He would have been 35. The twins and I made the noodle soup he used to make, which neither of them remember him making but which they've heard about enough times that it feels like a memory. Nadia added too much ginger and announced that she liked it better that way. And I thought Marcus would have found that extremely funny. After they were in bed, I sat with a cup of tea and thought about something Marcus's mother Ruth said to me at his funeral almost 9 years ago now. She'd held my hands in both of hers and said quietly, he used to say you were the most competent person he'd ever met. Not in a cold way, he meant it warmly. He said you were the kind of person who figured things out. I didn't understand what to do with that at 25. With 7-month-old twins and no money and a grief so heavy it had its own weather. I filed it away. I understand it better now. There's a version of this story where I'm angry. Where the betrayal of it, the accounting, the burden, the quiet laugh at the kitchen table, lives in me as something hot and unresolved. But that's not the version I'm living. The version I'm living is quieter than that. It's the soup on the stove and the drawing on the fridge and Patricia with her dog at 7:15. There is a difference between being alone and being at peace. I spent 3 years in a house full of people feeling the first one. I'm learning now what the second one feels like. Turns out they don't feel anything alike.